it's my pleasure to invite the Joint Standardization Boards to share with us their success with standard stories. Thank you for bringing us right back on time to our last panelists. And let's please keep our presentations from the next panel to 20 minutes or less, and we'll see if we have time for a question or two at the end. I'll go ahead and introduce each member of the panel as we transition between slides for the sake of time. So first up, joining us will be Colonel Kathy Brown for Mobile Electric Power Systems. Colonel Brown has operational acquisition experience as well as service in the International Cooperation Office in OSD. You just heard from Mr. Fleming in that office. Colonel Brown today will share the successes of the MEPS JSB. Colonel?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be invited to participate in the Defense Standardization Conference. Thank you, Ms. Postle and Mr. Thomas from the Defense Standardization Program for inviting me. By way of introduction, as already introduced, I am the project manager for Expeditionary Energy and Sustainment Systems under Program Executive Office, Combat Support and Combat Service Support. I assumed my position on 9 June after a 2-year stint in OSD, as you already heard. Great to hear from my former teammate, Eric Fleming. Under the charter of PME2S2, we have a very active Mobile Electric Power Systems Joint Standardization Board, MEPS JSB, that allows us to effectively coordinate a DoD family of standard tactical power between our 4 services in OSD. And thus far is working well to standardize power and for power to be the first consideration when developing power requirements. But before I begin my presentation, I would like to make a few points. I believe our JSB is successful because we've built strong relationships that allows us to work issues not only during our semi-annual conferences, but also in between these meetings. But there are times, though, in rare cases where non-standard waiver or deviation is required, and we typically try to approve and track progress just in case the non-standard capability can be used elsewhere. But our goal is to enforce as much standardization as possible to minimize the inevitable consequences of the proliferation of non-standard systems throughout our formations. Next slide, please. The objective today is to really give an overview of the MEPS JSB and emphasize the need for DoD standardization of battlefield tactical power. I will also highlight recent accomplishments and implications to our mission of standardizing power. So standardization is not new to me, and in my role at OSD, I attended several defense standardization meetings with my international partners. Standardization, as you heard prior, is very critical to building partner capacity to ensure readiness and interoperability. I also attended STANAG meetings with my international partners for body armor in my previous role as the Army's body armor product manager. But being here is definitely a great opportunity to recommit to the importance of standardization for our joint force and allied partners, especially in today's uncertain world where the next conflict is likely to be against a near-peer adversary. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about my project office and its portfolio. It's primarily located on Fort Belvoir. And as you can see, there's very diverse, ranging from power generation, power distribution, as well as expeditionary force sustainment capability to meet warfighter requirements. And there are 3 product management offices under the charter, as you can see there. So from left to right, we have the Product Office for Small Expeditionary Power Sources, which currently leads efforts to build a family of scalable, modular, and hybrid small power systems. We have our Mobile Electric Power Systems PMEPS there, who is in the throes of getting ready to develop, test, and field a large power tactical solution that will replace the LTAMS, that will replace the Patriot systems through the LTAMS radar. Currently, the MEPS office provides power at sizes 5, 10, 15, 30, and 60 kilowatts and distribution capability with the 30 kilowatt and 60 kilowatt sizes, which can be networked together into a microgrid configuration from 2 generators up to 6 generators. And then finally, my FSS team, which is located at Natick, Massachusetts, provides the Army a wide variety of combat support systems that range from, as you see there, cargo aerial delivery, field feeding, and field services in support of soldiers on the battlefield. We are also pursuing an initiative to standardize shelters for the Army. You will hear from Mr. Melvin G., the GSB lead for expeditionary shelters and basing equipment, on our shelter standardization immediately following my presentation. Next slide, please. In essence, the video is basically demonstrating all the issues that they had with non-standard generators on the battlefield. It created a logistics nightmare, and there was no standardizations, there's no maintainers, technicians, warranties, there was problems receiving parts. And that video was just illustrating that. And it's been a part of our archives since our PM office was formed in 1967. And the video comes from a time of 1950s. So regardless of whatever the source, it shows the origin of the generator standardization problem in World War II, which resulted in the immediate action to standardize tactical power. We're on the next slide, which has the video. Okay. So we, in fact, have a memo from the War Department prior to the OSD structure that documents the steps the Army took to enforce generator standardization immediately after World War II ended. So let's take a walk back in history. So just a few historical facts that will frame the problem and basically chart the way ahead to tackle the standardization problem. So despite winning World War II, the President and Congress reorganized the nation's defense establishment and made the decision to unify the different services under one department because they acknowledged the problem of having disparate systems, processes for training, doctrine, and supply chain management, as you see there, which led to the creation of the National Military Establishment in 1947, ultimately forming what is now the Department of Defense in 1949. What happened there, they withdrew cabinet level status from the 3 service secretaries. So history clearly denotes that standardization was one of the important reasons for this reorganization and was the impetus to create a more effective and most economical organizational structure, basically to improve what we now call readiness issues that result from the lack of standardization. As the saying goes, if you don't learn from history, you're definitely destined to repeat it. Next slide, please. So fast forward to 1967, when OSD saw the same generator standardization challenges 20 years later in Vietnam, OSD took action. So in 1967, OSD issued, as you see there, the DoD Directive 41/2011, signed by the DefSecDef. There have been multiple revisions since then, with the most recent one being signed in August of 2018 by Ms. Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment. So why is this important? The directive identifies my office as a lead standardization activity, further solidifying the policy for standardization with responsibilities as outlined in the DODM 4140.24. But it also deemed the service MEPS program offices with the responsibility for the operational aspects of acquisition planning, purchasing, and performing contract administration for the MEPS standard family, as well as the charter to review and grant deviation requests for the use of non-standard MEPS. Next slide, please. Now, the first bullet there is very important as far as trying to solve the problem. Enforcement is the single most essential component to maintaining standardization. I was in a meeting the other day where power requirements came up and someone said, I can just buy a generator from Home Depot. Often commanders don't realize what you receive in terms of military standards and capabilities when choosing an approved enterprise power end item in our supply system. So case in point, there was an article from the National Defense Magazine in 2007 titled Generators, Batteries Create Logistics Nightmare for Troops. And they're talking about the time in Iraq. So generators were bought off the shelf in theaters. Some systems were repainted and being sold as new. Generators never came with warranties. The manuals were written in foreign languages, if they had a manual at all. And to compound the problem, there was a lack of repair parts as well as knowledgeable technicians. So what a burden, right? And fast forward as well, there's a battery standardization problem too, which our office is looking at trying to tackle, where in theater, many of the weapon systems and tactical devices now use sophisticated proprietary batteries, which are often not in the supply systems and requires the unit to order directly from the vendor, whether they're in the United States, Europe, or what have you. But ordering from the battlefield to a manufacturer directly, in the States or wherever, but not on the battlefield, presented major logistics challenges, often where the batteries did not reach its final shipping destination, basically rendering that weapon system ineffective. So the problems documented in this article is just like the challenges they had in World War II. So if we're going to fix standardization, it is really all of our jobs to design and enforce it. And as easy as it sounds, it really does take a coalition of the willing to fully implement, execute, sustain, and promote the goodness of standardization. Next slide, please. So here's how we tackle it as a JSB. Our JSB is very active and engaged, and I cannot overstate the importance of having the discipline to meet. We meet the fourth Tuesday of April and October, and I will host a JSB at the end of this month. But our JSB meeting allows time for networking and for building personal relationships, which helps to promote and enforce standardization. Everything that we do is all about relationships, right? 98% of standardization is work internal to the force services, and it is often the office's jobs, the MEPS offices, to promote or sell, if you will, power systems to their PMs within their service on the advantages of DoD standard family of power. So the PMs make the choice to integrate DoD power systems as a component of their system. Our goal is to have power requirements to be one of the first considerations and not an afterthought. There are many great advantages for using standard systems, and we have to continue to emphasize that to these commanders. There are shorter lead times on critical parts in the provision DLA supply system. There we can create a demand history and capture costs, making it more centralized to obtain data, which allows us to not only capture requirements from the customer, but it allows us also to anticipate their needs out in the field. Using standard systems allows for a standard DoD process. That means generators get fixed. That means that there are warranties. That means that there's depot level repair. All of that is very important. And then finally, we procure the best systems to ensure that it meets military standards of durability and reliability. And this all results in a lower lifecycle cost in the long run. Next slide, please. So here are some of the recent accomplishments that we have. Having tactical microgrid standards will make it easier in the near future to interface generators from different vendors who will build to a common interface standard. The working group that you see there has leveraged years of R&D work, much of it funded by the Operational Energy Capabilities Improvement Fund, to start the process to publish a MIL standard. The Marine Corps recently replaced their entire inventory of 100 kilowatt generators with 120 kilowatt microgrids. This allowed PME2S2 to work with the other three services to identify any 100 kilowatt requirements or shortages, and then to redistribute those assets, especially ones needed for real-world readiness requirements. Internally, we have established MOUs with Army PEOs such as PEO C3T, IEWS, Missiles in Space, and Aviation, where we have an annual requirement to meet, to promote standardization, and to understand their emerging requirements. And again, I said before that our MEPS office is responsible for developing that large tactical power system for the lower tier air and missile defense system that will replace the Patriot. This will help to introduce a new large tactical power source into our inventory that will now be open to all of DoD. And finally, MEPS as an enterprise now has the visibility in the milestone documents table in the new DoD I 5085. So prior to an acquisition milestone, DoD component PMs that require MEPS as a subsystem or a standalone end item for a program must coordinate it with their service MEPS office. The milestone decision authority is responsible for ensuring compliance with this issuance at each milestone review. This is significant because now power is a consideration first and not an afterthought. There's a little bit more rigor in the system, a little bit more scrutiny, which is good for us. So these are a few but very significant accomplishments. All of them are in the vein of standardization. So as I get off the stage here, just like to say that it took a lot of time and hard work to get to where we are. And I will leave you with that standardization is a critical factor in reducing the logistics footprint, lowering the life cycle costs, and maintaining readiness. The JSB is a great lever to ensure progress. Again, relationships, teamwork, and a coalition is ultimately the driving factor to implement, sustain, and ensure standardization. There's more scrutiny or rigor in the acquisition process when it comes to power, which is a good thing. So I think if we can all, as a coalition of the willing, continue to commit to work together to increase standardization across the force, that's how we can continue to make forums like these successful. Next slide, please. So here are a few references for my presentation today. Next slide, please. And here's the contact information for different PLCs within my office. We do have a mill suite, so if you have a CAT card, you can have access to the mill suite, and also you can find us on the global as well. So if there are not any questions, I will now transition to the JSB lead for expeditionary shelters and basing.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you to your team for all the work you're doing within the JSB to standardize electric power systems. And I just a quick apology to Mr. Lloyd Thomas, and will be joining us here in a second. I completely overlooked the fact that he was planning to introduce each of our JSB members. Lloyd, in addition to managing DSPO finances, is my lead for each of the joint standardization boards. So with that, Lloyd, over to you to introduce our next guest.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Good. So real briefly, Colonel Brown, thank you so much for that presentation. I think you're being a little bit, you shine more than you're letting on. The Joint Standardization Board concept by the Mobile Electric Power Systems folks has been taken to a whole new level. They've actually codified the JSB Joint Standardization Board concept within their latest DoD instruction that was just put out the year before last, replacing their directive. And so they've actually taken the concept of coalition of the willing for JSBs into an actual required attendance for developing requirements, discussing acquisition decisions, and other things. So we may be trying to do the similar type of thing in the next JSB to present, the Expeditionary Shelters and Basing Equipment. Now, let me just introduce you to that real briefly here. We've only got about 20 minutes each,